Hello and welcome to the Human Improvementality Project. This episode will be a kind of beginner's guide / overview on the topic of lucid dreaming. If you aren't familiar with what lucid dreaming is, essentially it's when you fall asleep and you're in a dream and you become aware or lucid of the fact that you are in a dream and can then basically, with some practice, take control of the dream and do all sorts of things that you typically wouldn't be able to do during your waking life. So you can fly, you could talk to dead people, you could have sex. There's all sorts of different things. I'm by no means an expert in the topic. I'm just a guy who got interested in it, especially after watching the movie Inception back in 2009, where I got absolutely obsessed with dreams and dreaming and the topic for a while and started going down the rabbit hole of lucid dreaming myself and trying to kind of recreate some of the magic that I saw in the movie. Although Inception, you can't really share dreams with other people like in the movie. Lucid dreaming is about as close as you can get. Anyways, without further ado, let's dive on in. So a quick little overview for those of you out there who are unfamiliar with the topic and unfamiliar with what a lucid dream is. But a lucid dream is when you are dreaming and then you become aware of the fact that you are dreaming and can, in certain circumstances, and usually after a bit of practice, with lucid dreaming, you can then control the dream environment and do all sorts of things. You can, of course, do anything that you would do in your waking life: eat food, talk to people, drive a car, whatever it may be. But obviously, the allure of lucid dreaming is being able to do things that you typically wouldn't be able to do in your waking life and in reality, such as use superpowers, you can fly, you can talk to dead people, you can basically summon things out of nothing, all sorts of different things. Really, your mind, the sky is the limit. And although there's been records of lucid dreaming throughout history, there's even this kind of dream yoga thing. I forget the exact name of it, but it's been recorded throughout history. However, lucid dreaming itself is actually a remarkably mysterious experience, given that pretty much everybody has dreams, with the exception of a small subset of people. And even if you think you don't have dreams, it's much more likely than that you're in that majority of people who can actually have dreams, as dreams occur during REM sleep. And if you don't get REM sleep, that is some bad news. Go see a doctor about that. Although dreams are something that pretty much everybody experiences, even though you might not necessarily remember your dreams, this isn't due to the fact that you're not dreaming during the night. You actually have dreams, but most people can't recall them, or will wake up, remember it for a little bit, and then as soon as their day kind of starts up and they get out of bed and they wake up a bit, forget their dreams. And I think this is kind of the key hurdle for a lot of people, is just that initial dream recall. But dreaming occurs during REM sleep, which stands for rapid eye movement sleep. And as you can see here in this little chart, basically every single night when you fall asleep, you go through these cycles of REM sleep. And as you can see here, you kind of start off the night descending into deeper and deeper levels of sleep, and then you will kind of rise into a less deep level of sleep. And REM sleep, or rapid eye movement sleep, occurs during this lightest sleep and lasts for about 30 to 90 minutes on average. That's how long the REM cycle lasts for. And as you can see here, a number of REM cycles occur during a typical 6 to 8 hour sleep schedule. So you're actually having multiple dreams per night. And although, as I mentioned before, you probably don't remember all of your dreams, this isn't because you're not having dreams. You're going through each of these REM cycles here, but you just might not recall them in vivid detail. It's one of those things where there's obviously some dreams that you can recall very vividly, but most people and most dreams, you typically forget about it as soon as you wake up and start going about your day. So this is kind of the key thing for beginners and kind of getting past that first stage is actually developing that dream recall. So the 3-step process I have outlined here for beginners this is just what worked for me, and I think is just kind of generally accepted to be the 3 kind of pillars behind lucid dreaming, at least in the beginner phase. And what this boils down to is a dream journal for improving dream recall, reality checking for training your brain state awareness, and then the MILD technique, which stands for the mnemonic induced lucid dreaming technique. And this essentially trains your intention setting and memory conditioning so that when you go into a dream that you'll be able to remember to, in fact, realize you are dreaming. So number 2 and 3 kind of work in synergy with each other, in training your brain to be aware of the state that you're in, whether it's wakefulness or sleep or in a dream. And then furthermore, being able to recognize that you are in fact dreaming and become lucid and aware of that state. What I will say though is step 1 is by far and away the most important, because if you can't remember your dream, if you can't recall your dream, even if you have a lucid dream on accident and you just happen to realize that you are in a dream, if you can't remember it once you wake up, what's the point anyway? So this is the key to everything, is being able to improve your dream recall. And the easiest and most efficient way to do this is through a dream journal. So what you can do is either analog or digital. It doesn't matter if it's an actual notebook or if you just want to type it into the notes app on your phone. But what you're doing here is as soon as you wake up, you want to write down anything that you can remember about the dream. And maybe the first couple of nights you don't remember anything, or you just remember the tiniest snippet. Write that down. Write whatever you can remember down, even if it's one word, one phrase, whatever it may be, just jot it down. And I think that over time, you'll be able to remember more and more. This is not going to be an overnight process for most people. For me, it probably took over a month before I could really start remembering multiple dreams every night. So that's just my personal experience. It could take you shorter. It could take you longer. The only way you'll know is you'll find out. But if you make this a habit, if you make it a habit to, as soon as you wake up, try to remember even the slightest bit and just write that down, you will notice you will start to improve at this particular skill. And then as you start to build out the dream journal, what I like to do is just kind of jot down the date, jot down just some kind of key words, and then just go into a description in as much detail as I can about the dream. And once you do that and start building out this dream journal, what you can do is you can start looking back on previous dreams, previous night's dreams, and going through that and looking for different dream signs. So these are any kind of recurring situations or items or characters or people, whatever it may be. If you start to notice any sort of recurring theme that is going on in your dream, take note of that. And so maybe you leave a page open if you're using some sort of notebook. Maybe you leave a page open at the very beginning or the very end of the notebook and just keep a running list of those sort of dream signs or dream themes that seem to be recurring. And just make note of that, because these will help you down the road. If you, let's say, for example, going back to Inception, in your dreams, you always see this purple elephant. And maybe it's not every single dream, but in a number of dreams, you start seeing purple elephants. That would be a dream sign. So write that down. And then by writing these dream themes down, these dream signs down, what you'll be doing is just kind of subconsciously planting that in your brain, so that when you are dreaming and you do see that recurring theme once again, it will be tied to the fact that you've, in your awake state, have made note of that and have become aware of that, and you'll be much more likely to notice it in the dream. And instead of typically brushing it off just as you normally do in the dream state and just kind of believing everything that your mind throws at you, you'll be you'll be more tuned in and much more likely to trigger a state of lucidity and trigger that kind of realization of, oh, hold on a second, I'm actually in a dream. This is the purple elephant that I was writing about in my dream journal the other day. And by doing so, you're just giving yourself a lot more opportunities and a lot more chances down the road to achieve that lucidity through stuff that already seems to be occurring through your dreams. Moving on to reality checking. So this is, as I mentioned earlier, to train that brain state awareness. And what a reality check is basically the easiest way to do this is to set some sort of reminder, whether it be an actual reminder on your phone that sets off on a little alarm and questions you, am I dreaming? But it could be anything. It could be, you could walk through every time you open up a door, or every time you go to the bathroom, or every time you wash your hands. Just some particular habit that you do multiple times a day. And whenever you do that particular action, what you want to do is question yourself and really think, am I currently in a dream right at this instant? And by tying that thought to a particular action, the logic behind it is that when you're in a dream doing that kind of mundane action, that sort of action that you do typically all that time, that particular habit, that by doing it in your waking state, eventually, if you keep on doing it enough times, enough repetitions, that while you're in the dream itself, you'll be able to so that when you're in the dream itself and you do that action again, you'll question, am I dreaming? And then you'll finally realize, you'll kick into that lucidity mode and realize you are in fact dreaming. Lastly, the mild technique. We'll go over this quickly and kind of touch upon it in the next section, which details some more lucid dreaming techniques. But the mild technique, which stands for the mnemonic-induced lucid dreaming technique, is a really beginner-friendly technique. And what this does is it trains your intention setting right before you go to bed, and is basically conditioning your mind to be thinking about lucid dreaming right before you go to bed and having it at the top of mind, so that when you enter that dream state later in the night, once you fall into REM sleep, like we showed on the graph here, since you don't fall directly into REM sleep, so you're not having a dream typically until about 2 hours or so into the night. But by doing the mild technique, and which is in essence all you're doing is repeating some sort of phrase in your mind and telling yourself over and over again something along the lines of, I am going to have a lucid dream tonight, or I'm going to remember that I'm dreaming tonight. Basically reinforcing some sort of phrase or mantra, if you will, over and over into your brain so that it's at top of mind, so that once you do actually start dreaming later on in the night, that it will be fresh in your head and that you will be more likely to initiate that state of lucidity. And lastly, this is kind of like the bonus fourth thing here, but just keep it on your mind. And this kind of plays into the reality check and mild technique thing. The more you read about lucid dreaming, the more you're passionate about it, the more you watch videos or movies. Highly recommend Inception if you haven't seen that already. Fantastic movie. And I think pretty much anybody who watches it will get obsessed with dreams and dreaming for a little bit. At least I did. And it's a great movie all around. Got a absolutely star-studded cast. Leo DiCaprio, Tom Hardy, Joseph Gordon-Levitt, Michael Caine. It's a Christopher Nolan movie. Absolute banger. Give it a watch. On top of that, another good one's Waking Life. It's kind of an old, maybe early 2000s movie. It's like a rotoscope animation, really philosophical, but also about lucid dreaming. Not quite at the Inception level, but a good movie nonetheless, and a good movie on the topic of lucid dreaming. If you're into philosophy and stuff along those lines, a good watch as well. But the more you keep lucid dreaming on the mind through reading, watching movies, YouTube videos, poking around on different threads, whether it's Reddit or some other resources that I'll mention at the end, the more that the topic's on your mind, the more likely it will be on your mind in a dream and thus triggering a lucid state. As far as lucid dreaming techniques, we already briefly went over mild, which is where you tell yourself and kind of repeat over and over in your own head to that you will have a lucid dream, or that you will recognize that you're dreaming within the dream. And basically what this boils down to is self-suggestion. And it's by far and away the most easy and beginner friendly, just because it requires very little effort. You can do it right before you go to bed. And what you do is you just lie down, you sit there, and you just kind of repeat this phrase over and over in your head until you fall asleep, with hopes that once you enter that stage of REM sleep, that it will be at the top of your mind, and you'll be more likely to enter into a lucid dream and recognize that you are dreaming within the dream. The next one, this one is also fairly beginner friendly, but a little more effort involved here. This is the wake back to bed method, or the WBTB method. And in this method, it is exactly as the name says. What you do is you wake up and then you go back to bed. But the timing here is kind of the crucial part. So what you'll want to do is you want to wake up about 4 to 5 hours after your typical bedtime. So whenever you fall asleep, 4 to 5 hours past that point. So let's say, to make it easy, you fall asleep every night around 12 midnight. So if you fall asleep then, you'd want to set an alarm sometime between 4 and 5 o'clock in the morning, 4 and 5 a.m., so that you wake up during that period. And what you're essentially doing in the wake back to bed is you're trying to wake up right before a REM cycle and fall asleep, so that you go straight into REM, and you're more likely to recognize that you're dreaming, since you're going straight into that REM dream state. And combined with the mild technique, this can be a deadly combo, because as I mentioned before, the mild technique is all about kind of pushing it to top of mind, so that when you get to bed, or when you get into a dream, that you'll have those thoughts of recognizing that you're dreaming fresh in your head. And by doing this combined with wake back to bed technique, you are, instead of having that 2-hour gap between when you fall asleep and when you enter your first REM cycle and your first dreams, instead of that, you'll be going directly into it when you fall asleep again. So for wake back to bed, to just kind of reiterate the steps there, what you'll do is take your bedtime, set an alarm for sometime between 4 and 5 hours. You can play around with these times. These aren't a hard set in stone rules. So maybe you try 3 hours, or maybe you try 6 hours from your normal bedtime. Really play around and experiment with this, because it's different from person to person. And obviously the REM cycles are different from person to person as well. But 4 to 5 hours seems to be a good starting spot. And then once you wake up with your alarm, what you want to do is stay awake from anywhere between 10 to 30 minutes and then go back to bed. So what I'd recommend here is writing down any dreams that you remember from earlier in the night. If you do, if you don't, that's fine. But this is a great time to write down anything in your dream journal that you might have remembered from previous dreams in the night. And then what you want to do ideally is kind of just keep the lights off or extremely dim. You can maybe read a little bit, but try to stay away from screens as much as you can, and definitely try to stay away from bright lights. So if you have like a dim bedside light, that's ideal. Or if your lights are on a dimmer, that's great too. But you really don't want to have any bright lights, because that will wake you up and make it more difficult to fall back asleep. As I mentioned, you could read, you can meditate, you can do all sorts of stuff, but you typically want to try to stay awake for a little bit instead of falling right back asleep once you shut off your alarm. You can still do it. Once again, this isn't any set in stone rules. You could do it. It might work for you if you just set your alarm, you wake up and you go right back to bed. It might work for you. But I think, at least in my personal experience, staying awake from anywhere from 10 to 30 minutes in between typically gives me the best results, as your mind kind of wakes up a little bit, and it's easier to keep those thoughts of it's easier to keep the mild technique sort of thoughts and intention setting in your head a little bit easier. These next two techniques are a little less beginner friendly. These are the wake-induced lucid dream technique, or WILD, and the dream-induced lucid dream technique, or DILD, D-I-L-D. And starting off with the WILD technique, this is typically, I'd say, a more advanced technique, just because it requires a bit more effort and it requires a little bit more practice, I would say. But once again, I'm going to keep on reiterating this. There really is no hard and fast rules. These are just suggestions, and some of these techniques might work much better for you than they would for other people. So give them all a try if you have the chance and you have the opportunity. But I will say that the wake-induced lucid dream technique is a little more demanding, just because what you're doing in this technique is essentially you're keeping your mind awake and lucid the entire time, the entire process throughout falling asleep. So you never lose that, you never lose full awareness, and you actually go straight into the dream in a lucid state. This particular technique is pretty difficult to do straight through at the beginning of the night. So I only really recommend combining it with the wake back to bed technique, just because it shortens that gap between when you initially fall asleep and you enter that REM cycle, you enter that dream state. So the wake-induced lucid dream technique, I would recommend only when combining with the wake back to bed technique, as it makes it much easier. Not to say that it's impossible to do straight up when you first go to bed at the beginning of the night, but it will make it much, much more difficult. So once you have done the wake back to bed technique and you've woken up after 4 to 5 hours from your typical bedtime with that alarm, and then stayed up for about 10 to 15 minutes, you're going to return to bed and just lay there completely still. Try to keep your body as relaxed as possible, but don't let your mind completely drift off. You want to keep that awareness and keep the awareness over your current state. And so while doing this, the kind of key turning point is you'll enter something called the hypnagogic state. So what this is basically it's the precursor to entering a dream. And in the hypnagogic state, you'll start seeing fractals and different visuals. And basically you'll start seeing visual hallucinations and auditory hallucinations as well. And not in the bad kind. I mean, just you'll start seeing kind of like shapes and colors, as well as you might hear certain noises or sounds or some sort of like drones or humming. But typically it's not super vivid. It's more abstract. If you've ever, something I kind of liken it to is if you're rubbing your eyes when you are, tired, and you start seeing those shapes and it feels like you're traveling through space, seeing all sorts of planets and stars and stuff. I kind of liken it to that sort of sensation, but for some people it might be different. That's just my personal experience. But it's pretty common to see some sort of fractals or colorful shapes, and this can be accompanied by physical or auditory sensations as well. Once you recognize that you're in this hypnagogic state or in the beginning stages of this hypnagogic state, you want to make sure that you remain completely motionless and completely still and just kind of go with the flow. It's a weird sensation, but you need to stay calm and relaxed, but also you need to keep your mind aware of the situation and lucid so that you can pass in through the hypnagogic state, which is basically the formation of the dreamscape, and into the dream while remaining lucid. And a key point along this and why you need to remain motionless is that your body will actually go into the state of REM atonia, which is also sometimes known as sleep paralysis. And in this state, your body basically shuts down all the muscle movement so that you don't act out your dreams. You actually go into this state of sleep paralysis every night, and it's a safety mechanism from your body to prevent it from acting out your dreams and damaging yourself in the real world while you're doing all sorts of crazy stuff in the dream world. So it's actually a good thing, but it can be a little freaky for the first times where you actively kind of experience your body going into this and you can no longer move. But I assure you, you will be fine. You'll come out of it, and it's a natural thing. Although, as I mentioned, it can be a little bit jarring at first. It's just one of those things that if you're doing the wake-induced lucid dream technique, the WILD technique, you have to start to get used to this, and it will take some practice. I think this is by far and away the most difficult one for me. However, it definitely has the most potential upside, as there's nothing really like going through that experience and going straight from being awake to into the dream and seeing the dream kind of form around you. Additionally, these are typically the most vivid lucid dreams, and you have the most control over them, at least in my personal experience. So definitely the most effort involved, but also the greatest reward. And lastly, of these 4 main core techniques that I'm mentioning, there are additional ones, but I feel like these are the core 4 that you'll see mentioned most often. And a lot of the other ones are kind of based off of these 4. But there are other ones out there, so feel free to do your own research. But I think these are the 4 most beginner-friendly and the 4 most often discussed. And this last one is the dream-induced lucid dream. And so this is just attaining lucidity while in the dream. So this is just could be through spontaneous realization or through a reality check, or noticing established dream signs as mentioned in the dreams journal section. But here, I'd say, in addition to the mild technique, this is kind of the bread and butter and works really well in conjunction with the mild technique and wake back to bed. But the core of this, all the heavy lifting for this technique is really done before you go to bed and during your waking life by keeping up to date on your dream journal, doing those reality checks and making that a habit, and then just kind of practicing that brain state awareness and just being aware of your surroundings and situation. Finally, a little recap to everything we've been talking about, just summarizing everything into a few short points. But for tips to initiate a lucid dream, step 1, record your dreams. Use that dream journal to improve recall, to make note of dream signs, and just flip through it regularly so that you not only refresh yourself on dreams that you've previously had and just to get those juices flowing, as I find that doing so, flipping through the dream journal and reading about past dreams will make it easier to remember that night's dreams as well, at least for the most part, but also just to kind of keep it in mind right before you go to bed as well. Going back to the mild technique, flipping through the dream journal before you go to bed just kind of keeps it fresh in mind and will make it more likely that it's on the top of mind when you actually enter the dream. Obviously, second is the reality checks, as we mentioned, and just make this a habit, whether it's, every time you check your watch, every time you walk through a doorway, every time you wash your hands. You can set a alarm or an alert on your phone, whatever it may be. Just make it a habit to do this anywhere between 5 to 20 times a day, I'd say is a good number. And just whenever that particular action or alert goes off, just take a moment and really think to yourself, really become aware of your current state and truly question if you are dreaming. And the more you make that a habit, the more likely that habit will carry over into your actions within a dream, and you'll be likely to get one of those dream-induced lucid dreams and trigger lucidity by doing a reality check within the dream after doing a particular given action. Next is self-suggestion, and this is truly tied into the mild technique. Just kind of repeating those phrases over and over in your own head before you go to bed, convincing yourself to remember to realize that you're dreaming and to keep it at the top of mind. Next up is a meditation, so a 5 to 10 minute long daily awareness or mindfulness meditation practice can go a long ways, as this is kind of training that brain state awareness, and on top of all the other benefits that meditation has, improving your ability to lucid dream is one of those you can add on to the list of benefits. So 5 to 10 minutes a day is perfectly fine. If you want to do more, do more. If you can't do the 5 minutes, do 2 minutes. Something's better than nothing, for sure. But I'd say 5 to 10 minutes is probably the sweet spot of that mindfulness meditation. And just when you're doing that, it's just kind of becoming aware of your particular brain state and being aware of yourself and your surroundings. And then lastly, visualization. So when you're falling asleep, picture the dreamscape in your head and kind of manifesting that, or picture a past dream that you had and imagine that scenario. And this is particularly helpful in the wake back to bed technique or the wild technique. So when you are falling back asleep after waking up 4 or 5 hours past your typical bedtime to that alarm, you're kind of giving your brain a jump start into creating that dreamscape and hopefully kickstarting that hypnagogic phase so that you can enter into the dreamscape easier. And if you are well versed in visualization and have been practicing that, it should be easier to kind of picture the dream setting, to picture the situation, and give yourself a better chance of getting through that hypnagogic phase and into the dream. So up until this point, we've been talking pretty exclusively about the first step, which is actually realizing you are in a dream and achieving that lucidity. But the second step, which is equally as important, is actually being able to stay within the dream while you're lucid, as it is extremely common that once you achieve lucidity and realize that you are in a dream, you'll actually, especially as a beginner, you will kind of overexcite yourself and basically wake yourself up from that excitement of realizing that you're lucid, and you have to start all over again, which is unfortunate. So to counteract this, there's a couple of techniques used to stabilize the dream, and all of these typically revolve around the five senses and utilizing your five senses within the dream to achieve some level of stability and to kind of bring the control back and prevent yourself from waking up. So some techniques include like clapping your hands together or rubbing your hands together as if you're starting a fire or trying to warm your hands. Another one is spinning around in circles, kind of like you're making yourself dizzy. Or another one, you could also focus on particular objects with your eyesight or your hearing or your smell, something in the dream to just focus one of your senses on and really pay attention at that. So maybe you can look really closely at some blades of grass or at your hands within the dream, whatever it may be. And lastly, just breathe slowly and try to relax. You don't want to overexcite yourself and excite yourself out of the dream and wake yourself up. Once you've gotten past the stage of realizing you are in a dream and then stabilizing the dream so you aren't waking up right away, it comes down to dream control. And in the beginning, you might not be able to just kind of like summon stuff out of thin air, magician style, like you initially thought you would. In order to get to practice this dream control, you can start by imagining something that would be precursory to the particular event or item that you want to summon or create in the dreamscape. For example, let's say you wanted to fly. Don't just think, I want to fly. What you want to do is kind of jog your brain into that action. So maybe you replicate like the Superman flying pose, or you start bouncing on the ground or jumping on a trampoline or something like that. Basically, you want to kind of kickstart your brain into something. Since flying is something that you have no concept of, it's hard to get that's a hard hurdle to jump. So what you're essentially doing is you want to kind of lower that threshold to something that's easier for your brain to wrap itself around. So by doing like the Superman pose or jumping on a trampoline or just kind of bouncing around first before you initially try to jump up to fly, you're kind of tricking your brain into getting more accustomed to a sensation that you're familiar with in order to generate a sensation that is completely new and completely novel, which would be flying around. Another example, let's say if you see a car and it's locked, then you could imagine that you have the keys in your pocket, or imagine that the keys are on the wheel well or wherever it may be. Just tricking your brain into a scenario that might actually happen in the real world, as opposed to just trying to like magically open the door on your own. These are just some little tips and tricks. And then lastly, you can kind of use doors or mirrors or corners of buildings, something like that, as gateways. So instead of trying to just summon a dreamscape out of thin air, let's say you wanted to like just teleport to somewhere. If you're in a city and you want to just be in the desert or on the beach or something like that, instead of just trying to manifest it in front of your own eyes, it's kind of tricky to, while it's definitely doable, it's definitely tricky for in the beginning stages. So utilize the aspects of the dreamscape that are already there that kind of cut off your visual, and as a bridge, so to speak, for generating that new dreamscape. So for example, if you're in a city, maybe you think to yourself, okay, on the other side of this door is a beach, and then you open up the door and then there's the beach. Or if I turn around this building corner, there will be a desert. Basically, anything that breaks your visual field will make it easier for you to turn that corner or open that door or look in that mirror and use it as a gateway to a completely new setting. Anyways, that pretty much wraps up this beginner's overview. If you have any more questions, feel free to comment down below. And there are a whole plethora of different resources. Some of the ones I recommend are dreamviews.com, which is kind of like a forum. This is where there's a bunch of techniques, and this is kind of where I got my start back in the day. Other than that, there is the book Exploring the World of Lucid Dreaming by Stephen LaBerge. This is a fantastic book, and he was kind of just a pioneer of a lot of these methods, and is kind of like the grandfather of the science behind lucid dreaming. I believe he was at Stanford University back in the 90s, kind of pioneering a lot of the techniques that we mentioned before, and exploring the science behind this, hooking people up to MRIs and doing sleep studies and all sorts of stuff along those lines. So the book is a little bit dated. I think it came out in the late 90s, but it's still a worthwhile read for sure if this topic interests you. And then other than that, of course, there's YouTube. There's plenty of YouTube videos out there detailing some of these techniques. And lastly, Reddit r/lucid dreaming is also a good resource as well. Anyways, thanks for tuning on in. Hope you found this helpful, and we'll catch you next time. Adios, amigos.